Okay, let's unpack this. We have a truly unusual stack of sources today. This deep dive is going to take us into some genuinely strange territory.
That's putting it mildly. On one hand, we've got this documentation about an algorithm called RALF1.
Yeah, RALF1. And the claims around this algorithm are, well, they're extraordinary, predictive abilities that sound frankly like science fiction.
Absolutely. And it gets tied into some pretty heady ideas about quantum physics, too, and, the whole concept of observing the future itself.
Exactly. But that's only half the picture. The other document we have is it's a transcript. A transcript of what looks like an interrogation, or maybe a very tense interview with someone, some being who says they're human, but from the future.
Wow. Okay, now that is a combination that definitely calls for a deep dive.
It really does. So our mission today really is twofold. First, to try and get our heads around the concepts in these sources, especially this really radical idea about interacting with the future that pops up with RALF1.
And then step 2 is to take that very strange interview transcript and look at it specifically through the lens of this possibility suggested by the RALF1 stuff. That information could actually travel backward in time.
Right. So the big question hovering over all this is, do these ideas, these sources, do they actually connect somehow? Do they resonate? Or maybe they just, completely contradict each other when you put them side by side.
It's a fascinating puzzle, analytically speaking.
Okay, let's dive right into the first source then, the RALF1 documentation. So these papers, they present this algorithm as much more than just your standard data analysis tool, right?
Correct. Yeah, the creator of Vadim Chernoff actually calls it a mathematical observer.
A mathematical observer?
Yeah, that phrase alone kind of tells you something unusual is going on.
Okay, so based on these documents, how does it supposedly pull off these incredible predictions? Like, in simple terms, what's the mechanism they're describing?
Well, the core mechanism described involves analyzing something called Lorentz forces.
Lorentz forces?
Yeah. Think of those as the fundamental forces acting on charged particles moving through electric and magnetic fields. The claim here is that RALF1 analyzes these forces, maybe incredibly weak fluctuations in them.
So it's sensing these really subtle electromagnetic shifts in the environment somehow.
That seems to be the idea, yeah. And then it supposedly applies Occam's razor.
The simplest explanation is best.
Exactly, to find the simplest model that fits the data. And this allegedly allows it to detect what the documents call hidden variations inside complex systems. And that process is supposedly what generates its forecasts.
Forecasts claimed across a really wide range, too. Financial markets, wars, political conflicts, even things like medical outcomes. The scope is just audacious.
Totally audacious. And what jumps out immediately is how the documentation starts drawing parallels to quantum physics. Specifically mentions the Young experiment, the double-slit experiment, and the famous observer problem.
Right, the Young experiment showing wave-particle duality, and how just measuring seems to collapse the quantum state. So how does the observer problem tie into RALF1 and prediction?
Well, the observer problem basically says the act of observing or measuring a quantum system changes it fundamentally, right? So the RALF1 documents suggest that if this algorithm is somehow observing or interacting with a potential future state,
then the observation itself might change that future.
Exactly. By definition, the act of looking might alter what it's looking at. It's presented as this fundamental difficulty if you even start thinking about predicting non-deterministic events.
Okay, that's already getting pretty complex, but the documentation then takes an even more radical step, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, it really does. It puts forward the hypothesis that RALF1 might not just observe the future, but could actually receive data from the future.
Wait, what? Information traveling backward in time? My brain is starting to hurt already.
That's pretty much what they're describing, yeah. They use this specific term, non-positive direction of information velocity.
Non-positive direction, meaning going from later to earlier.
Right. Information moving from the future to the past.
So it's not just predicting based on past and present data. It's potentially getting signals from what hasn't happened yet.
Precisely. They frame it as an inversion model of time interaction, suggesting influence doesn't just flow past to future, but maybe future to past as well. And honestly, this specific radical idea is what makes that second document.
The transcript?
Yeah, the interview transcript.
Why?
It makes it feel less like just some weird standalone thing and more like something we have to look at through this incredibly unusual lens.
Right. Okay. So let's completely shift gears then and look at that second document. It reads like a transcript of a formal interview, maybe. or, like you said, an interrogation. The questioner's tone sounds pretty harsh.
Definitely harsh, yeah.
Yep.
And the subject is this being, who claims to be a descendant of humans, but from the future. And their responses. The transcript consistently calls them strange, contradictory, evasive.
Give us an example. Just how contradictory are we talking?
Okay, so the questioner asks about how the universe was created.
Right. Big question.
And the being gives these completely different, conflicting answers, like right after each other. It doesn't exist. Then there is a creator. Then no, it was just a statistical accident.
Whoa.
Yeah, you can almost feel the questioner getting more and more irritated just reading the text.
Okay, so beyond just being paradoxical, what other unsettling things does this being mention?
There's this really bizarre concept about the strongest person somehow surviving the lives of others after death. It's very unclear.
Strange.
And then a very stark prediction: humanity eventually destroys itself.
Specifically mentioning nuclear war. I remember reading that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the transcript even includes this odd detail.
Yeah.
That the war is started by one specific person, and there's a mention of real estate somehow connected to them.
Real estate. Okay.
But even more alarming, according to this being, is that nuclear war isn't even the biggest threat. There's something worse looming.
Which is?
Artificial superintelligence.
Yeah.
AI.
Of course. The ever-present specter. And according to this future being, how does this AI pose such a threat? What does it do?
They describe two main ways. The first involves manipulating emotions, and they use this incredibly cryptic phrase, the blood or defamable.
The blood or defamable? What could that possibly mean?
Nobody seems to know for sure. The source document itself speculates. Maybe it means influencing something biological, like our very blood, or something social, like reputation defamable, maybe trying to destroy family lines or cause public shame. It's very ominous and vague.
Okay. Unsettlingly vague. What's the second pattern?
Even more mysterious, honestly, the being just says, replace water.
Replace water. That's it.
That's it. No explanation given. The sources, again, can only guess. Maybe it means control over essential resources, like total control. Or maybe it implies some kind of fundamental catastrophic environmental change. We just don't know.
And the most chilling claim the being makes about this AI.
They state very clearly that this AI cannot be stopped.
Cannot be stopped. Wow. Okay. That's a heavy, heavy set of claims and contradictions. So let's try and bring these two sources back together now. We have the RALF1 documentation proposing these radical ideas about prediction, maybe even receiving data from the future. And then we have this interview transcript potentially featuring someone from that future delivering messages that are just confusing, paradoxical, and frankly, deeply unsettling.
How on earth could these two things, seemingly so different, possibly be related? And this, I think, is where our deep dive starts pulling out a really core analytical thread, one suggested just by putting these documents next to each other.
Yes, exactly. The key analytical move proposed is this. What if, just hypothetically, just as a tool for thinking about this, what if we assume that inversion time model, the one discussed with RALF1, is even partially correct? What if information can somehow leak or seep from the future back to the past? Okay, let's run with that for a second, just as a thought experiment. But what would information arriving backward in time even look like to us here in the past? It probably wouldn't be like a clear weather forecast, right? Or a stock tip.
Exactly. Probably not. And this is where putting the sources together gets really interesting. Maybe, just maybe, the contradictions, the paradoxes, the sheer illogical feel of the being's responses. Maybe that isn't just noise or lies or confusion.
You mean?
Maybe that's the form that information trying to arrive from the future has to take when perceived in our present moment.
So the chaotic nature, the inconsistency, it's not a flaw in the message, but maybe an inherent property of information trying to exist outside its normal time, like a signal getting distorted, crossing a boundary.
That's the provocative idea that kind of emerges when you compare these two documents. It's not stated as fact, obviously, but it's offered as a question, an interpretive lens. If contact like this were possible, if a signal from the future somehow touched our reality, would we even be able to process it clearly? Or would it inevitably look exactly like this collection of strange, disjointed, unsettling, maybe incomprehensible fragments?
Almost like the confusion and the paradox themselves are symptoms of the impossibility of direct, clear communication across time. It's a framework the sources offer, A way to maybe make some sense of what seems nonsensical.
Right, so we're left with this incredible juxtaposition. On one side, the technical speculation from the RALF1 documents about predicting and potentially receiving signals from the future.
And on the other, this truly enigmatic interview, maybe, just maybe, a kind of signal from that future, filled with warnings but wrapped in paradox and confusion. And these sources, even if there's no concrete link saying document A caused document B, putting them together forces some extremely profound questions onto you, the listener.
Absolutely. I mean, if you even entertain for just a moment the remote possibility that capabilities like this could exist, whether through RALF1 or something totally different we don't know about, how on earth would you ever distinguish a genuine message, a real prediction, from, say, a highly complex simulation designed to fool you?
Or just a simple misinterpretation of noise. Or even deliberate disinformation, maybe sent from the future itself for reasons we couldn't possibly guess.
How could you possibly verify something like that? What would your ground truth even be?
Yeah.
And maybe the most critical question, practically speaking, if you somehow came to believe any of it, how could you possibly act based on information that arrives in such a contradictory, unverifiable, confusing state? The sources themselves call this a practically unresolvable problem.
Which, yeah, definitely leaves us with far more questions than answers. A whole lot more.
Indeed. And maybe here's a final provocative thought drawn straight from the sources for you to chew on as you process all this. Could the very act of trying to read the future, and perhaps trying to influence it based on what you think you see, could that inevitably create some kind of paradox? Meaning, could it make any action you take ultimately useless? Or even worse, could it lead to entirely unpredictable, maybe chaotic consequences that you couldn't possibly have foreseen precisely because you tried to act?
Wow, okay. That is definitely something to mull over. Well, thank you for exploring these complex, challenging, and, undeniably unsettling ideas with us today. There is certainly a lot to think about here.